Hey, welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Stephanie Warwick, and I'm the General Chair of ICFP 2020, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to ICFP. I'd like to give a particularly warm welcome to those of you who are getting up early or staying up late in order to attend this live event. Although this isn't exactly the ICFP that I announced a year ago in Berlin, I'm very delighted to see so many people here. In fact, this is the largest ICFP ever. As of this morning, we have 1,189 people registered. We also had a great day yesterday with the workshops PLMW, Erlang, Hope, Tidy, as well as 4 tutorials. In just a few minutes, we're going to start off the main conference with our first keynote by Audrey Tang. But before that, I want to say just a few words about the Clouder system that we are using for ICFP this year. Clouder is a new platform developed by volunteers over the summer for running conferences like ICFP. It may not be quite as mature as some of the tools you may be used to, but it performed very well yesterday, and I've heard a lot of positive feedback about it. If you run into issues with the platform, you can contact us in the tech support channel, which is available at the bottom of your screen. Also, on Wednesday, the Clouder team is going to be hosting 2 virtualization feedback sessions where they really would like to hear your experiences with virtual conferences in general and the Clouder platform. I want to also remind you that ICFP has a code of conduct. Even though when we're in this online format, things can sometimes be a little bit more impersonal, please remember to treat everyone here with respect. I will also want to tell you a little bit about the SIGPlan CARES team, which is new this year. This is a new initiative by SIGPlan to provide a friendly ear and guidance for anyone experiencing discrimination or harassment throughout the SIGPlan community. Several CARES members will be here at ICFP and will be available for 2 drop-in sessions tomorrow for questions. That said, I hope you will be looking for opportunities during the next few days to interact virtually with everyone here at ICFP. Spend a little bit of time becoming familiar with all of the networking tools that are available on Clouder. Join in the poster session to chat with a student. Stretch yourself perhaps to join one social event that may not be in your comfortable time zone. Join into a Q&A session after some of the papers that you'll see later today. There's a lot of ways that you can interact, and I hope to see you throughout the conference. So at this point, it's now time to switch over to our session chair, who's going to introduce our keynote speaker.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ken Shan, and it is my honor and pleasure to introduce our first invited speaker, Audrey Tang, Taiwan's digital minister. To my knowledge, this is her debut performance on the iQIYI streaming platform. For 30 years, Audrey Tang has been figuring out how the world works, rebuilding it one bit at a time, working with other people, and making it look fun. In doing so, she has inspired people all around the world, not just in terms of her technical prowess, and I will add the good taste of implementing Pro with using Haskell, but also an awareness of politics, of philosophy, of language, and of humanity. Audrey struggles with public education systems that don't always exhibit the same awareness, have been well documented in books and articles. She dropped out of senior high school while still in junior high school. That was the 90s. Since then, Audrey's work and leadership, both as an entrepreneur and as an open source contributor, grew up alongside the World Wide Web. Audrey showed us that cellular data can be used during a democratic protest, not just to witness police brutality, but also to foster policy debate. She showed us that image recognition can be crowdsourced, not only to label people with slurs, but also to label politicians with financial contributors. And comma-separated values are not just for COVID case counts, but also for mask availability. However, I have no idea what referential transparency has to do with all this, so let's find out.
Hello world, and good local time, everyone. Really happy to be keynoting the ICFP on both YouTube and ICE. And I also have no idea what referential transparency has to do with the pandemic. In fact, I have so much confusion that I would just resort to sharing some cute dog pictures with you. I hope you're all seeing the cute dog pictures. Now, the cute dog pictures are from our participation officers. These are a bunch of people in each ministry in Taiwan. That's 32 ministries. And in addition to the parliamentary officers talking to the MPs and the media officers talking to the press, the participation officers talk to hashtags. And these hashtag officers all work with this very simple idea that if people in a pandemic look for guidance, it's actually much easier for people to run into the infodemic, conspiracy theories, and so on, so much so that people would share non-scientific information around. And in Taiwan, we figure out that the best way to fight a infodemic with no takedowns, we don't have administrative takedowns here, and the pandemic with no lockdowns is to use cute dog pictures. And the cute dog pictures, this one named Zongchai actually lives with the Ministries of Health and Welfare's participation officer. So after each and every Central Epidemic Command Center press conference, this Zongchai translates scientific knowledge into cute memes that reminds you to cover your mouth and nose while sneezing. That reminds you that we are wearing a mask not to protect other people, but protect ourselves from our own unwashed hands. And remember to pre-order your mask and also keep physical distance that's counted by the number of Shiba Inus. If you're indoor, keep 3 Shiba Inus away. If you're outdoor, keep 2 Shiba Inus away. And so all this, I guess, are pretty deterministic, meaning that no matter how you remix the messages, the core of the message stays the same, and that it has no side effect on constitutional democracy, meaning that it doesn't, unlike takedowns or lockdowns, it doesn't hurt the liberal democratic polity. And if it's something that is deterministic and is free of side effects, we call it referentially transparent, and that's how the title came from. So in all seriousness, I will just brief you some ideas from the Taiwan model of the pandemic playbook, and that would just take a few minutes, and then we'll just make this a pure Q&A driven session. And so the subject matter, again, is on digital social innovation, and then the 3 pillars named fast, fair, and fun. On the fast part, in Taiwan, we have this Reddit-like chat channel called the PTT. It's run by a not-for-profit sector. Now, last December, Dr. Li Wenliang, a whistleblower from Wuhan City, posted on their social media that there are, and I quote, 7 confirmed cases of SARS in the Huanan seafood market, unquote. And it got reposted on the PTT and get upvoted very quickly. And so our medical officers immediately noticed it, and then we start health inspections from Wuhan, China to Taiwan. And so I think this is a sign that we, according to the Civicus Monitor, that not only is the only completely open jurisdiction in Asia in terms of freedom of assembly and speech and so on, but we're a really young democracy. So we keep looking for novel ideas from the civil society. So we don't have any idea of how best to counter the coronavirus. So we just like this talk, crowdsource the data. And the crowdsourcing take form in this very simple toll-free number 1922, which are guaranteed to be idempotent. If you call it with the same question on the same day, you get the same answer because there's a huge call center underneath. But it's not just to get a question answered, but rather if anybody calls with a new idea. For example, back in April, there was a young boy who called saying, I don't want to go to school anymore because you're rationing on mask and I don't get to pick the color and all I have is pink medical mask. And voila, the very next day, the live streamed CECC press conference, everybody wore pink medical masks. And I would argue that this is a much more efficient way of gender mainstreaming and amplifying good idea from the civil society than any top-down approach. And so this keeps everybody in the business of making sure that if they see anything that may be not fair from the government, they work to make it fair instead of just criticizing. And so case in point, and I will end after this slide. This is a simple map that shows the visibility of the mask in all the different pharmacies around Taiwan. And this is actually in Penghu, another island. And so, as you can see, the red are the one that runs out of mask, and the green are the one that still have mask. And if you go to any pharmacy, starting from early February, people can just swipe their national health insurance card and collect. If they're a adult, then nowadays 9 medical masks per 2 days, per 2 weeks. If they're a child, then 10 per 2 weeks. But the good thing is that this is updated every 30 seconds in a kind of distributed ledger, distributed among more than 100 toolmakers, so that if you swipe your NHI card, people queuing after you will expect this number to drop to 49. But if this rather grows, instead of dropping by 9 medical masks, people will call 1922 right there. And so this is participatory accountability that keeps everybody honest and making sure that people who, for example, come up with this idea of, oh, what about people with sight differences, of color blindness, of hearing difficulties, and so on. We make sure that not only voice assistant and chatbots and so on are made by the civil society. Actually, none of this application layer stuff is made by the government. And so we radically trust the citizens with the open data, and they make very parallelizable ideas and tools and so on, so that we're all in this together. And so that's how we managed to fight off the pandemic with no lockdowns, because we work on the messages that travels quickly and make sure that the humor travels faster than rumor, that the humor has a higher R value than rumor, so that people don't fall into conspiracy theories. I promised that was my last slide, and so that's it. And any questions?
So I want to remind everyone that you can ask your questions on Counter. There is a specific paper channel for this talk. If you search for referential transparency in the search box, you'll find it, or you could click on well, under sessions live, that'll probably bring you to where we're collecting questions as well. But while we're still looking for questions to come in, let me ask a first question, which is, well, basically about how this may or may not have to do with functional programming, because in my mind, there's kind of a tension between functional programming and this sort of participatory democracy and the kind of rough consensus that maybe open source development is more known for, right? So, you know, when I think about functional programming, I'm sure I'm not, this is not a universal experience, but I think about functional pros, I think about beautiful, elegant programs that are not arising out of committee action. So can you talk a little bit about functional programming in a messy world like this one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the main function of functional programming in Haskell in particular is taking as an input a messy real world and return a slightly less messy real world plus something of a new value, right, of the type A. That's literally the type of the main function, which is IO of A, which is from real world to a tuple of real world in A. And so I think when designing the pandemic response, there's a lot of functional-ish thought in my mind. For example, we could easily, in the mask availability case, instead of relying on people to watch and to make sure that the system functions as intended in a participatory, observable way, we could instead choose to publish the number every day and just tell the people to trust the government. And so that would be a more, cathedral-like way of doing things, and that would ensure that none of the Taiwanese people will work with the CECC, I'm sure, because the Taiwanese people, if one thing, they say, when the CECC tells us to wear a mask, we wear a mask. When the CECC tells us there's no need to wear a mask, we wear a mask anyway. And so I think it was for 48 hours that we were afraid that there's not sufficient mask for the people on the front line. So for 48 hours, we said that, for example, in the metros and so on, if you're not in an especially dense area, there really is no need for people who are healthy to wear a mask. And then we got so much backlash from 1922, so that we retracted that message after just 2 days, and then saying we're ramping up the mass production immediately now. And so I think a lot of this boils down to making sure that when people see something wrong in the government, or if they think of something better, that we have a fast iteration cycle so that they can patch our messages without discarding what's already there. They can make a forked version, which in my mind is spelled real world prime, and then they can contribute that as a descriptive function, not immediately running it yet because, well, they are not the CECC, but we just make sure that we get from the collective intelligence literally every day, and then every day respond with this live stream saying, oh, here are the working patches to our main function, and then we're just adding to it without changing anything that we have said. We're now patching just these specific things. And so I have in my mind, for example, people who said that pink medical masks are not hip, and so using the CCC press conference, we make it very hip. We also get people who contribute these traditional rice cookers. I'm sure you have seen one from Datong or from Guobao. And turns out that if you don't add water, a professor Lai Chunyu called and say, you can use it to revitalize, to disinfect your medical mask for a couple times at least, and it just go to 110 Celsius very quickly, and then goes down very quickly, so it doesn't damage the PP material, but it kills the virus. And the CECC was initially very reluctant to even accept that such an idea exists, because medical masks are one-time use, according to them. But then they made their own experiments. The people made their own experiments, and in just a few short weeks, the Commander Chen Shizhong is in the CECC press conference cooking medical masks. And so I would say that this kind of patches is only possible when people can see each and every measure and see through it and look at the epidemiologic implementation, the reasoning behind it, kind of not just see the type, but also the proof, the code, and then make meaningful changes and adaptations on that.
Great, thanks. Great. We were just suggesting that you enter screen share so we can see you bigger.
But you can't do that for me, which you did.
Oh, okay, great. Top voted question from Aijiro Sumi right now is, what do you do to help people with little IT literacy, like those who have no internet device?
I know. In Taiwan, we have this strange idea that broadband access is a human right. Anywhere in Taiwan, if you don't have 10 megabits per second, unlimited data with just $16 per week, per month, even on the top of Taiwan, which is 4,000 meters almost, the Savia or the Jade Mountain, you're guaranteed to have 10 megabits per second. Otherwise, it's my fault. Personally, it's my fault. You can talk to me. And so, yes. And so we have broadband as a human right. That's the first thing. But even if you have broadband as a human right, and even if you can get tablets from your local library or digital opportunity center, it doesn't mean that you know how to use it, right, to pre-order the masks. And in fact, that's why we work with pharmacists and later on convenience store clerks to ration out the mask. Because instead of saying, we do rationing based on mobile payment or those name-based easy card, I'm sure most people don't know what I'm talking about. But in any case, these are like mobile electronic payment devices that could have implemented the real-time based rationing sooner. But we instead chose the National Health Insurance Card, which covers more than 99.99% of not just citizens, but also residents. And nobody can say, I don't have a NHI card if they stay in Taiwan for more than 6 months, because it's universal single payer. And so they don't have to know how to use the network. They can just present the IC card to the local friendly pharmacist or a local friendly staff in the kiosk of a nearby convenience store, which altogether maybe 20,000 of such spots in a country with 23 million people. And so people would just show them very carefully how to navigate the pre-ordering system. And then once they learn about it, they can also teach 10 other people. I taught my 87 years old grandma that way, and she told her younger friend of 77 years old. And Grandma Yang taught 10 other people. So we have proof that this has our value of 10 when you design it with the elderly.
Great. You mentioned trust in the government earlier. So here's a question about trust from Simon Peyton Jones. You stressed the merits of decentralized, crowdsourced But effective crowdsourcing, sharing of accurate information, relies on centralized infrastructure that is trustworthy, trusted, and develops rapidly. Yet, centralized IT systems are notoriously difficult to get right. How did you manage to avoid that trouble?
That's a great question. I think we do it through the procurement rules. The procurement rules in Taiwan says that if you build a system for human beings to use, and if you neglect to provide an open API for both the reading and writing part, and which is a Linux Foundation standard, then the vendor could be qualified using pretty much precisely the same language as the, if you code something just for people with sight, and with if people who have sight difficulties cannot navigate your website, then you could be disqualified for being unprofessional. And we say if you build something that's only about user interface and has no API, well, it's a discrimination against robots. Well, we don't quite say that, but that's what we put in our procurement language. And so because of that, our IT system are like Lego blocks. In fact, the pre-ordering of masks system is the same as our local text filing system, both in the app as well as in the convenience store kiosks. And pharmacies that connect to the system reuse the same as their kind of recurring prescription system and so on. And because all these systems has existing APIs in place, not necessarily open to the public, but they are API documented, initially Swagger, now OpenAPI 3, the people who work on this kind of emergency systems to link things together only need to talk to the well-defined endpoints instead of to the kind of fragile backends that some Peyton Jones was suggesting. So I think adopting an API-first procurement rule since 4 years ago really paid dividends during this pandemic.
All right. So here's another popular question from Christopher Kokowitz. Many countries are weighing privacy trade-offs of track and trace, including different apps. How is Taiwan navigating this?
But this is like, how do we manage side effects in a referentially transparent coding environment?
How is it similar? Because you can never get out of the monad. How can you get out of this privacy violation?
I know, you just don't use apps. So in Taiwan, we have never used any apps for contact tracing and tracking, period.
But you talk to the cell phone companies, right?
That's right, but that's not an app. It's a feature that we activate when there's an earthquake. People, except the most marginalized people who are not enjoying their broadband as human right as much, and we promise to fix that. Most people receive a SMS seconds before a major earthquake hits. And so people who miss that SMS often tweet that they are being forgotten by the country. That seems to be happening less nowadays. And whenever there's a heavy flood, like a typhoon, we don't have a typhoon here in Taiwan for the past couple of years now. But whenever there's a typhoon and you're in a place that are vulnerable to, for example, flood and things like that, you will also receive a SMS. And these two SMS are based on the idea of cell phone tower triangulation. Basically, we tell the cell phone towers near the earthquake or the flood zone to send through triangulation to the cell phones that could receive SMS, this bulk SMS, and warn them that they should withdraw, retreat, or whatever, pivot. And then the good thing about that is that we've been running this for many, many years. And so people understand that this is not a tracking mechanism. There is literally no way for us to force you to withdraw from that area. And that SMS is just one way. And people understand they don't have to turn on GPS or Bluetooth or any Wi-Fi communication technology. All it needs is a cell phone signal from your nearby 3 cell phone towers. And so it's not very precise, maybe 50 meters of radius if you're in an urban area, even wider otherwise. And so I talk like this because we're just changing a few parameters in that SMS warning system so that when people return to Taiwan, they have two choices. Either you go to a hotel for quarantine for 14 days, in which case you're physically barred from leaving, or you can choose to home quarantine, in which case your phone is put into so-called digital fence. And if the phone escapes of the digital fence, well, we send the SMS not only to you, but your local household managers and your local friendly police staff. And so if you keep in the quarantine every day, we pay you $33 as a stipend. But if you break out of the digital fence and turns out that you break out of the quarantine, then you pay us back 1,000 times that, so we can fund 1,000 more quarantines. And so that is basically the idea, and that is why people, by and large, understand that this is just a 14-day measure. After the 14th day, the phone is out of the digital fence. There really is no constitutional basis for us to continue keeping track of you. And because we've never declared a case of emergency, we have to operate entirely within the constitutional limits. And so this is a deep, narrow, and opt-in, I would argue, because you could choose the hotel quarantine, right? Measure that is privacy invasive to a degree, but it's not as invasive as, say, installing an app. And most importantly, it doesn't collect any new data. The cell phone strength is something that your cell phone towers are already collecting anyway.
Great. So there are a few questions that are sort of comparative questions. So I'm going to try to combine them about what Taiwan would do differently if it were to do it again, how much it has to do with people's experience with the SARS experience in 2003, and also what differences between Taiwan and other countries like the US and various parts of Europe would most influence sort of different ideal pandemic management strategy. So difference in time, difference in space.
Okay, so yeah, in SARS in 2003, we had to lock down an entire hospital, the Heping Hospital, unannounced with no definite end date of the lockdown. It was very traumatic, and 33 people died immediately because of SARS. I think 73 died of the collaterals. And so it was so traumatic so that everybody who's above 30 years old, who still remember SARS, me included, to us, lockdown is just something that we don't go to. We do not even consider lockdowns when we first work through our post-SARS constitutional requirements. The Constitutional Court eventually ruled that locking down the Heping Hospital was borderline constitutional, but the parliament should do everything in its power to find ways, such as the digital fence, that is time determined, that has a fixed amount of days, that has a stipend policy, and that beats physical unannounced lockdowns. And so I think this collective mobilization, societal mobilization, really is possible because of SARS. And so every year after SARS, we've been running yearly drills in our hospital systems. And so for people, for example, the PPEs, like medical masks and so on, they just rush to it whenever we hear about Dr. Li Wenliang's whistleblowing in the social media.
Yeah, I'm not sure if people can sort of plan to have a SARS experience in their own countries if they want to help their own countries. But here's a question. How can computer scientists do to help deploy Taiwan's solution in our own community, like the US? This is from Israel Likely.
This is a great question. I think there's a few things. We work closely with several epicenters. For example, the South Korean people called us saying that they really like what we're doing with the PPE distribution logic and so on, so that they would really want to just convince their government that opening up API first really works. And so we work with them on that. And so I think the first availability map that's running in Korea was from Tainan, from somebody in Taiwan who doesn't speak Korean but speaks JavaScript. I'm sure that's enough. And so that's that. And also with Japan, with Code for Japan, we also built this Stop COVID dashboard. You've probably seen the Dr. Lawrence team on the Johns Hopkins dashboard, which is a very comprehensive and very good for this overview understanding. But for travelers to Tokyo, it could be overwhelming with all its statistics and numbers and so on. So we built a very simple one, and the Japanese people, the Code for Japan people, managed to convince the Tokyo metropolitan government to give them a GOV domain, a government domain, and then the GovZero people here in Taiwan work on translating it to Taiwanese Mandarin. And so I actually personally just translated one word in the language selector, and so that somehow gets tweeted by the mayor of Tokyo, now in her second term. And so it became kind of like track 1 diplomacy. But even though I'm just opening up a pull request on GitHub, so it's like track 0 diplomacy, I'm sure. And so my main message is that there's a lot of toolkits that people can look at. For example, on the COHACK hackathon, COHACK.tw. That's a joint Taiwan-US. I guess if you're from the US, it would be the US-Taiwan joint statement on the counter coronavirus. And we managed to make like 5 tools that can not only do the storytelling, but also do a privacy enhancing technology on keeping a community aware of its own cases, and many more like that. Like we work with Gemini Explore on making a kind of chatbot way for people to get access to the latest community statistics and determine their risk and so on. So check out cohack.tw. And if you need to work with any of our open source teams, the Gov0 people are at join.g0v.tw.
Awesome. So here's a question from Norman Ramsey. In the USA, humor is not typically a government function. What ministries use humor as an important part of their work, and how has Taiwan developed a cadre of civil servants who can use humor effectively? How do you train your improv?
I know. So humor over rumor, very important. So I think this started when we started looking at all sorts of disinformation during our election, and some sponsored by foreign governments, I'm sure. And then we really need to figure out a way. Otherwise, people would just say you should do administrative takedown, which at some point makes us becoming non-liberal democracies anymore. And so we were just scrambling to find ways, and we just happened so that the people in the Gov0 always one step ahead of the government itself. Made sure that they built this tool. And I think this is the first time that I saw that it is possible, even in the end-to-end encrypted channel. This is Line, which is like WhatsApp. It is actually possible for us to learn a little bit from the old counter spam community, Spam House, and things like that. If we encourage people to flag things that are hoax, scam, rumor, or urban legend, and forward it to the spot, which is called CoFact, collaborative fact checking. And the CoFact, after you forward it, will immediately forward back if it's already a fact-checked story, or it will forward it to professional like Taiwan Fact Check Center, which are professional journalists dedicating in a non-for-profit. There's many international fact check network members. In Taiwan, there's 2, Michael Penn and Taiwan Fact Check Center, but they work with international counterparts. So we have an early dashboard into seeing what disinformation is trending. And then once we know that it's trending, we can work with the ministries to make sure that we can, on average, produce a meme that is more funny than the disinformation within an hour, or at most 2 hours. So the rule was 222. So it must be within 2 hours with 2 pictures and with less than 200 characters. And so basically it has to fit, the 2 pictures each have to fit on a mobile phone screen, so as to increase its R0 value, right? So that it will spread to more people. So for example, just one example, there was a rumor that says perming your hair will be subject to $1 million fine starting next week. And just as this rumor was trending, maybe as the R value of 2, like every hour, average each person shared to 2 other people. Not even 2 hours, our premier, Su Zhenchang, rolls out this meme, which is hilarious. So this is a barber's light in Taiwan. And then it says in this topic, perming your hair will be subject to $1 million fine. That's not true. And then a younger version of the premier who says, I may be bald now, but I will not punish people who look like my youth. And a fine print that says, what we've introduced is a labeling requirement for hair products that takes effect on 2021. And then a hair dryer with the premier as it looks now, and say, however, if you keep perming your hair within a week, although it would not damage your bank account, it would damage your hair. Just look at me for what will happen to you. And because it is hilarious, he makes fun of himself, not other people. This ends up having a much higher R value than the disinformation, than the rumor. And so in no time, like in just a couple of hours, searching for perming hair, fine, whatever. Everybody just see this mimetic picture, and nobody see the rumor anymore, the disinformation anymore. So that's one of the cases pre-pandemic. And during the pandemic, there was also a case where people were saying that because we're ramping up mass production from 2 million a day to 20 million a day, that's the fact. The rumor says, quote, because the tissue paper are made of the same material, we're going to run out of tissue paper soon, unquote. And this maybe has an R value of 3 or 4, like this went viral. And so people went out and panic buy, X out this disinformation. And so in a couple hours, our premier, you saw his front side, this is his back side, shows his back side, wiggling his bottom a little bit, and then shows in very large font. Each of us only have one pair of buttocks, which is a wordplay because in Mandarin, tun, to stockpile, is the same sound, it's a homonym to tun, which is buttocks. And so it's basically saying in a tissue paper package that it doesn't pay to stockpile. And then this table that says, tissue paper is made out of South American materials and medical masks from Taiwanese domestic materials. So completely different things. And this went absolutely viral. And so after just a couple of days, the panic buying died down, and we eventually persecuted the 3 people, I think, initially sharing the original conspiracy theory. Turns out they were tissue paper resellers. I hope that these are some lively examples.
Yes, thanks for the funny examples. I'm sure it will help this talk spread further. So I'm going to next go to a question by Edward Yang. He liked the analogies between participatory democracy and open source. However, it seems to him that both systems, democracy and open source, struggle when scaling up to the more people. So what thoughts do you have about dealing with democracy when there are too many people? Just to add to that, Ohak Hammer also wanted to know about scaling up, not just in terms of the number of people, but also the number of aspects of regulation. So maybe not just from masks, but also from other aspects of pandemic management and beyond. So how do we scale up democracy?
Yes, I think we scale up democracy using ways that enable us to listen better. In radio and television, there's countless ways to make one person that talks to millions of people reach more people, but there's very few systems that concentrates on listening well and enable people to listen well to one another, and it scales to millions of people. I don't know about millions though, but in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands range, Taiwan has had a lot of success with this AI system, open source, called Polis. And Polis, I think, is written in Clojure, so counts as functional programming, I'm sure. And Polis basically visualizes, you're looking at a real visualization of the Uber X case in Taiwan when people deliberated in 2015 about what about this new company that employs, but it doesn't say employ, works with local partners that are taxi drivers, but they don't have a professional taxi driver's license, and argue that they route cars better than existing taxis do, but they don't want to pay taxes, and so on. And so it was a very tensely debated topic in the society. But instead of just jumping to conclusions, we just crowdsourced the facts about Uber, and then leave 3 or 4 weeks every time for people to just resonate with each other's feelings. And that's what's often missing from representational democracy, is just that the representatives have feelings, but the people's feelings are not represented by representative that much. And so that's where Polis comes in, so that we can make sure that the best ideas are the ones that take care of most people's feelings, and then we turn that into regulations. So the user experiences like this, you will see one statement from your fellow citizen. I think passenger liability insurance is very important. And then if you agree, then you move toward me a little bit. If you do not agree, you move farther away from me a little bit, or you can skip. But there's no reply button. With no reply button, there's no room for troll to grow. And then once you answer that, another sentiment is there for you to answer, until, of course, you'll be also motivated to post something for other fellow citizens to vote on. And these areas are measured not by the strength of numbers. So even if you mobilize 2,000 people to vote exactly the same, that doesn't change this map at all. What this measures is the diversity, the plurality of ideas. And so this is a real conversation that the Bowling Green, Kentucky run in a kind of virtual town hall. And so this may be the most important picture in this slide, entire slide. Even though that people do have their ideological differences. And if you look at the social or institutional media, you think that's all there is. Actually, most people agree with most of their neighbors on most of the things, most of the time, when you just ask about their feelings. And for example, everybody feel that not only STEM, science, technology, engineering, math is important, but the arts are important. And so the K-12 should read STEAM instead. No matter people identify as Democrats or Republicans, they all agree with this sentiment. And so that's clearly a lower hanging fruit that the mayor should be working on and so on. So my point here is just if you focus on the rough consensus, not the fine consensus, and allow something like assistive intelligence to reflect the people's feeling back to one another, then I think not only you get the rough consensus as agenda items to work on, which by the way, Uber is now registered as a Q taxi, legally operating taxi in Taiwan, but we also incorporated surge pricing and all sorts of Uber innovations into our legislation. But we also make sure that the polity grows closer to one another instead of just dividing into filter bubbles and so on during this consultation process.
Great. So I think a lot of us are, sort of itching to try to learn lessons from this and sort of implement it or carry it over into our own context. And there's of course some differences that make us not so hopeful. So Denis Rodozubov says, asked you if you think a similar solution is viable without government support during a pandemic. So because it's hard to imagine this kind of openness of sharing information and from some governments. And Aijiro Sumi also asked relatedly, how do you communicate with people, including politicians and bureaucrats who don't always understand technology? I'm sure you have that experience. And also how do you get support from those people?
Yeah, I think what we're very fortunate in Taiwan is that in our post-sunflower historical context, we occupied the parliament for 22 days back in 2014, asking the parliamentarians, because they were refusing to deliberate a trade pact, the people just occupied their place to do their work for them. I think that's the basic idea. We just did a very large scale, like 500,000 people on the street, many more online, deliberation. So in Taiwan, people do see that this kind of scalable listening is possible. Many people have participated in it, producing 4 demands, not one less, which all gets accepted by the head of parliament back in 2014. And so around the end of 2014, all the mayors that did not support open government of this kind, trusting the people, did not get elected, sometimes surprisingly. And all the mayoral candidates that did occupy or participate in the Occupy, or at least support Occupy, gets elected with very high numbers. And sometimes surprisingly, they didn't even prepare inauguration speeches. And so I think that changed Taiwanese politics for the better. And so every candidate after that need only to say I trust the citizen, but not only that, but also how exactly do they trust the citizens more? And so if people don't say that, they don't get elected. It's that simple. And so I do think I'm not saying that you should occupy your parliament first, although it's kind of effective. But what I'm trying to say is that there really needs to be a kind of demonstration, not in a protest sense, but in a demo sense that you can point to and say, look, here is something that has actually worked. And in a lot of our epicenter to epicenter diplomacies, it may be sufficient, like with South Korea, just look at Taiwan and that it worked for them to just kind of take a leap of faith and start trusting the people more. And so, yeah, I really think you can earn trustworthiness bit by bit. It doesn't need the government to put everything to the civic tech community. The community may or may not be ready. But if someone says, hey, I have a better idea, at least in the daily press conferences, you can give that someone a seat at a table and then share their innovations to the population. And that plus the toll-free number may be a very good start to begin with.
Yeah, so in the opposite direction, in terms of how much people should trust the government, I think there, even on the chat, there's some disagreement about how much people should trust the government and whether the government should be in the business of deciding what is true and what isn't. And on the other hand, whether the government, how much the government should react to conspiracy theories and sort of establish that kind of trust. So, again, when we're in functional programming, we try to minimize our trusted computing base, but
I know,
here it's not
zero
clear
trust.
whether the same thing transfers. And yeah, what can we do about being trustworthy, not just being trusted?
I know whether the representational state transfer works, and to the state, I mean. So I think there's 2 points here. The government should always trust the people. And the more we trust the citizens, the more trustworthy citizens are. And this works regardless of whether citizens trust the government. And I think that really is the key. Because, for example, the digital fence or the persecution of the people who intentionally spread harmful untruth about panic buying of tissue papers. In Taiwan, we have a clear line that says if it's intentional, harmful untruth, and if it's a harm to the public, like to public health or to voting, not just to a minister's image, which is just good journalism. If it harms the public and is intentionally doing so with untruth, then it falls outside of the freedom of speech protection. And we have that doctrine for, I guess, many years, many decades now. We're just translating it into a digital realm. We didn't make any new laws about that. But I'm not saying that everybody agrees with the court on that. And I'm not saying that everybody agree with the constitutional court that somehow the digital fence is better than physical quarantine. In fact, I think when we first explained the digital fence, the approval rate was 91%, meaning 9% of people did not trust this mechanism. And so they ask a lot of questions through the MPs, through 1922, through social media. And so our CECC have to give an even more detailed account of how exactly the SMS work, how exactly the telecom towers works, and so on. And once they did that explanation, the approval rate jumped to 94%, and we still thank the other 6% because they keep us honest, they keep us accountable. And I think this is as it should be. I do not think that people should trust the government. I think the government should earn trustworthiness in particular aspects, but never as a whole of the government. So if you find particular parts of government worthy of your trust, do that, but always on a kind of transactional basis and always with the trust earned by the government first.
Yeah, so that actually leads to some confusion on the chat about what happened with the original shares of the bad information that you mentioned. Did you pursue them in the courts, or was it more like an executive function? I mean, you already talked about
No. Yeah, it's not the executive function's job to determine truth or untruth. It is whether it's intentional and harmful is the court's job, and whether it's factful or not is the independent fact checker, the journalist's job. In our executive yuan, all we do is to improve the comedies.
So you did prosecute. I don't know.
Yeah, the prosecutor, independent prosecutor, did prosecute the original 3 people that intentionally make these messages, but there's no law upon which we can prosecute the people who share these messages, because that will fail the intentionality check.
Great. So I'm not sure if I'm switching gears a little bit, but I was noticing that in all this discussion, there's not just a reliance on quick, fast data access, but also education of the people. So I was wondering if you could say something about maybe differences in terms of the educational system in Taiwan, how much people should trust that, and how that has worked out.
Well, I mean, I know someone who wrote this book called Microsoft Conspiracy that eventually indirectly convinced me to drop out of junior high school. And anyway, by convincing me that senior high school isn't much fun anyway. And so, and
2 authors.
That's right. There's 2 authors of this book. Ken can only share half of this responsibility. In any case, what I'm trying to get at is that my dropping out of junior high school when I was 15 years old is entirely blessed by the principal. Principal Du Huiping of my junior high school read my exchange with random people on archive.org. It's still around. I know it's forked into many spawns of open access movement. My golly. And so
when you say archive.org, you mean ARCHIVE, right?
No. I mean the Cornell one. ARXIV.
Oh, okay. ARXIV.
Yeah. Right. So I just, when I was doing the science fair project, which can also supervised, I guess, no, really, gave opinions about, which is about natural language processing and logic reasoning. I just looked up random ARXIV papers and started writing to random authors who didn't know I was just 15 years old, who couldn't even speak English very well, and nevertheless wrote back to me, and I discovered this, open access community. And then I told my principal with email printouts saying that whatever you want my education to end up, which is doing research, contributing to the academia, I'm doing anyway. So I should do this full time. I shouldn't just spend most of my time on junior high schools and senior high schools and so on. And so she thought about it for a minute and say, okay, tomorrow you don't have to go to school anymore, she said. And so she faked the records. And I actually met a few weeks ago the director of the education bureau in the Taipei City. And he actually knew about my case and intentionally also not touch the faked records. It's all, good now. But back then it was an act of civil disobedience. And so I was given room so that I can start a company and so on. But I think people who are younger than me, like literally 2 years younger than me, gets to participate in the alternative experimentation schooling, so that whether it's institutional, like the Waldorfschule Schule, or the groups or by individuals, they can just work outside of the curriculums. If they are given a evaluation, they would just say, we plan our curriculums in a way that's different, but arguably better than the national curriculums. And now up to 10% of Taiwanese students is educated this way. And just last year, we brought the best learnings in the past decade of experimental education into our K-12 curriculum, so that we focus no longer on the old curriculum's ideas of individual-to-individual competition, rote memorization, or even I would say the media literacy was a kind of obsolete term. We don't use it anymore. We now say media competency, so that literacy assumes you're just consumers of media, consumers of stories, consumers of data, but data stewardship, media competency assumes that everybody is a producer of stories, is a part-time journalist, if you will, and should be educated in the art of making narrations, making narratives, instead of just, taught about the framing effect. Because frankly speaking, many K-12 students now have more Instagram followers than I do. That's what you get with broadband as a human right. And I think like in our presidential platform and debate earlier this year, there's thousands, if not tens of thousands of very young people who volunteer to fact check each and every word all our three presidential candidates said in kind of collaboration with institutional media. And that gives me hope, because then whether you're in K-12 or whether you're part of the experimental education system, which has now moved on to, for example, for the indigenous people to learn Amis, and then from Amis learn English with Amis and ignore Mandarin altogether, which is very experimental, and that will, I think, further improve the plurality of our imagination of the society. And instead of just saying, getting the K-12 curriculum just right, each and every school and indeed each and every student can design their new curriculum nowadays.
Thanks. There's a lot there, kind of almost an overwhelming amount to learn from Taiwan, perhaps, in terms of how education might work. If you want to disavow any part of that, please let me know. But in the meantime, I'm going to move on to another question from Simon Peyton Jones, who asks about trust again. So, it's hard to dispute trusting the citizens, but individual citizens can be terribly wrong or biased, etc. And even substantial groups of citizens can go off the rails. We can just look at the rise of populism in Europe and the USA, and let me also add in Taiwan. So can trusting the citizens go wrong, especially if it's hijacked by perhaps substantial subgroups? And again, how can functional programming help us establish this kind of trustworthiness?
I know, we know something about, not being hijacked by side effects. You can design the interaction space. As I mentioned, all our interaction spaces are designed without reply buttons and rely only on upvotes and downvotes. And that I would say, significantly reduce the surface for trolls to grow. It's a way of troll control, obviously. And there's all sorts of ways to say that only these free of reply interaction spaces, including one you just saw on Polis, are politically binding. And everything that you share on the social media and so on do not become binding until you go to one of those binding places, which are by design free of this kind of time-wasting, loyal to advertisement, surveillance capitalism logic. And so that, I think, is the first part of this. And also, we must not forget about the power of face-to-face deliberation. Even though nowadays, when we're wearing masks, it's much harder. I'm sure that our Champ Mask team is now producing masks with a plastic or transparent middle, so you can still see each other's mouth, and that therefore restores a little bit of trust. But I think the point here is that instead of thinking that people are trapped in the filter bubbles and so on online, I think much easier if you can share with them on their place and do a town hall or something and meet them where they are. So this is my office, literally my office. It's the Social Innovation Lab in the middle of Taipei City near the Jianguo Flower Market. And these soccer fields are drawn by people with Down syndrome, with trisomy differences, who look at the world, I'm sure, not as functional abstractions or functors or objects with arrows, but as something that Van Gogh would look like, as kind of topological connections. And so when people step into it, they become more creative. And any Wednesday, you can just walk here and see me, because I walk to this place and back, and just grab me and have 40 minutes of my time. If it's pre-booked, maybe 20 minutes. If it's not pre-booked, the only thing that I ask is that everything that we talk about will be made public, either as a video on YouTube or as a transcript on the Say It platform that I set up myself, so that as a digital minister, you can see I've already held more than 1,400 meetings with 5,000 people, more than 200,000 speeches. I'm sure that you can search for Haskell in it somewhere. And then here is my Rebuild FM conversation with Tatsuhiko Miyagawa. Anyway, and so that's how the entirety of my work is made accountable. And so just make sure that lobbyists who come to me, for example, David Plouffe, who was lobbying for Uber at that time, basically made sure that you see all sorts of different quotes that I did with follow-up journalists, but he really could only argue about Uber in a way that is pro-environment, pro-social, for the global goals and so on, because he knew that this is not only on the record, but also on 360 record. You can put on VR and relive the conversation. And I say at the end, just know that everything you send my way will be made public. And so this basically makes hijacking very difficult. Actually, I would argue almost impossible, because all the different stakeholders will be looking at your lobbying in terms of a kind of ledger technology, and very quickly people around Taiwan says that, oh, what about people who are not close to Taipei, who cannot make it to the high-speed rails? Well, for example, early morning tomorrow, I'm traveling to Tainan, and in afternoon to Jiayi, and the next day to Kaohsiung, and so on, to meet people where they are, to empower people closest to the pain, and just to spend a couple of days with them and doing an ethnographic hanging out with the citizens, and then people would just meet in their regular town halls with the elders, meaning both the elderly and the indigenous elders, with the help of translators. But when I travel, I also bring with me this live conferencing kit, so that we can connect back to the Social Innovation Lab in Taipei, where the 12 different ministries will be able to look through my eyes, the local people, their innovations, their suffering, their pain, and then figure this out together. And everything is, as I mentioned, just completely stored on a ledger that is called Git on the Say It platform, and tracked on GitHub. And so the upshot of this is that while individuals may be motivated to hijack, if you design the interaction space so that their pro-social tendencies always outweigh the kind of lure, the temptation to be antisocial, then even the fragments of people's goodwill can accumulate and much more easily. And that is, I think, part of the why digital social innovation is so crucial, because without this record-keeping technology, we cannot reconnect fragmented trust, and it's much harder to encourage kindness.
Yeah, so we're almost out of time. So if anyone has some final questions, now is really the time to get it in. I'm gonna ask one from Aijiro Sumi. He's wondering, and I'm also wondering, how much code did you write yourself this year?
Quite a bit. You can track it on GitHub, actually. I still maintain the Moe dictionary, which is a multilingual dictionary in the GovZero movement. I also fix some bugs in the CPAN, that's the Comprehensive Pro Archive Network's signature public key infrastructure. I also fixed one typo in the TaiwanGoldCard.com, which is this group of people who happen to be in Taiwan, perhaps on a tourism visa, consider this a safer place than their home country, and then just wrote applications saying that, hey, I'm a talented professional digital nomad, and they get this 3-year gold card that entitled them for residency, healthcare, and things like that, and without having to work with a Taiwanese employer. So consider that when you next visit Taiwan. And after, I think, 5 years or something, you can also get dual citizenship. So a good deal overall.
All right, and one last question. This is mostly, I hope it's not just from me, but you've talked a lot about trust and freedom and democracy and privacy. So what is your opinion on total functional programming?
I know, total functional programming. So I will first say that I think the strong functional programming, restricted form on recursion and so on, is of course very much worth pursuing and studying, but I do not yet have tried it out, and so am not qualified to give a opinion or an assessment. Instead, I will share something about total societal function, maybe here, about the idea of singularity, which to me sounds as total can be. And so I will share my job description. It's pinned on my Twitter, so I'm just reading it as kind of a ceremony concluding the keynote, but it does talk something about singularity and total function that closes over the entire society. And it goes like this. This is literally my job description. When we see the Internet of Things, let's make it the Internet of Beings. When we see virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. When we see machine learning, let's make it about collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. And whenever we hear that a singularity is near, like totally near, let us always remember the plurality is here. Thank you for listening.
I'm sorry to break the flow, but if I have time for one more question.
Yeah, of course you do.
It's about the creation of bilingual and I believe multilingual materials, I think, for pandemic management. Was it, how was the overhead or the workload? I know that your rice cooker video has been translated into I don't know how many languages. So maybe you could speak about that.
Which video, sorry? The
rice cooker video.
Oh yeah, the traditional demo? Yes, the traditional rice cooker demo. And would you like to repeat the question again?
Oh, just in general, how did you manage the creation of multilingual materials?
Right. So a few things, right? In the beginning, it's just me and Django.com and occasionally Keepin.com. And so our Board of Science and Technology kindly paid for the translation and proofreading of multilingual materials. And eventually we got digital governance written into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, like in addition to the things that we can share with the international community on healthcare, on medical, vaccine and making of drugs, and also on agricultural technology, which is all things that Taiwan are traditionally known about for. And so this is digital governance that I just shared, and it adds to the list. And ever after that, I just get random foreign services in, for example, I think it was in Hamburg, that wrote me saying that they have a Deutsch translation of their traditional rice cooker material. And so now I think the foreign service people are very well versed in just getting the message out and translating into their local messages. And so if you look on Twitter, for example, it's all Taiwan in your city. And so that's the new MOFA, the Magic Ministry. Anyway, it's a Mandarin joke. But in any case, nowadays, we're also seeing a lot of foreign service people who just with one click can summon me to any meeting. And that also situates me in different cultural contexts, and real-time captioning, such as the one that's provided very diligently by a professional service right now, also served as to ease the linguistic barrier. And right afterward, we would often just translate segments of it and then translate it into a local Instagram or a local meme or something.
Thanks. That's all. So thank you again for your wonderful talk and Q&A, and thank you for your time. I understand that you have to go right after this, but I also know that you have a reputation for being very reachable on the internet. So
I know.
For anyone who has further concerns or questions or discussions, I encourage y'all to reach out. And yeah, all right. So that's it for our first invited talk. And I just want to remind everyone that we're going to move to a coffee break. So you could find the coffee break on Clouder if you go to people/places at the top, where you could join an existing video conversation, as well as creating a new video chat. And at 10:30, or rather at 25 minutes from now, whatever time that is for you, we're going to have a student research competition poster session, which you can access through the exhibit hall, also at the top of Clouder. And also Benjamin Pierce is going to be running another Clouder training session. So thanks to everyone, especially people who contributed all the discussion on Clouder.
Thank you.